All right, everyone. Welcome to the second OpenStack Bootstrapping Hour. I'm Sean Degg, one of your hosts. We also have today Jay. Introduce yourself.
Hey,
Where's your
my
placard?
my little banner doesn't work, so I went lo-fi. Just I'm the pug dude, so I'll just put that up there.
Nice. Dan.
I'm Dan, and my little banner does work, so I'm using it to mock Jay.
As you should. And our speaker today is Ann Gentle.
Hey, I'm Ann. I have no lo-fi anything.
We're figuring out the whole technology thing. It's good. It's good.
I'll get there.
Okay, great.
And thanks for inviting me, y'all.
Thanks for coming on.
I'm excited.
Yeah. So Ann, we're gonna jump right in here for people on the live stream. That's linked from the wiki. There's also an Etherpad link from the wiki that has the ability to ask questions from it, and you should actually go and add questions there if you want.
Yeah, there's also a link to the slides that we'll be sort of going through on that Etherpad, and please do ask questions. There's only questions from Ann and me right now. So Matt Trainish, I'm looking at you.
Nice. All right, and so with that, Dan has thrown up slides, and we're gonna let Ann get talking.
Yeah, so I wanted to, I don't know, should we start with the slides or start with the questions? What do you like?
I was hoping that Ann would just sort of like briefly describe sort of her daily role as doc queen, and I don't know, just give us a little background on like the folks that you work with on a daily basis and sort of what your day-to-day work in the OpenStack doc field entails.
Yeah, so I started working on docs way back in the beginning when there were just 2 projects, and boy, weren't those the days. Because now the docs have like exploded.
Well, we have like 3 or 4 now, I think.
Yeah, times 10, right? Oh my gosh. So yeah, I mean, and that's kind of why I'm really excited to talk about it today, because we have developer docs, but then you have to say, well, what kind of developer? And so there's a contributor developer who's like, I want to hack on OpenStack, but then there's the app developer who's like, I want to make cool stuff that runs on OpenStack. And so, documentation like just explodes into all these audiences, right? So, I remember back in the day, when I started, we just had Nova and Swift docs, and even those were just, by devs, for devs, and then we had this sort of handed down from Cloud Architect spec that became the API doc starting out. So that, when you look at like where we were in 2010, and then, so I literally just counted how many pages we have on docs.openstack. It's like 11,000. It's insane, right?
What percentage of those do you think you personally wrote?
Oh God, not that many anymore. Thank goodness.
I don't know. I was looking at another presentation that you had done, and I was looking at your stats on GitHub for like the sheer number. And for those of us who basically live in the code, and we're like, oh, there's whatever it is, 1 million lines of code across all of the OpenStack projects. First of all, if you go look at Ann's contribution to OpenStack manuals, you will see that the number of lines of documentation is well over 800,000 that Ann alone has contributed.
Oh, man.
It's
probably all white.
Just to put things into perspective, I mean, it's quite amazing. So kudos to Ann.
Thanks.
All right, yes, round of applause for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like I know enough OpenStack to get around, but even after, so we did the operations guide in that 5-day sprint, and that was really interesting because we brought people together who had been running OpenStack, and I even had to turn people away who wanted to come to it, didn't know what they were getting into, I'm sure, but wanted to come to it, and I was like, you haven't been running OpenStack long enough, so it's yeah, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you can do when you get people together, and then we filled in each other's missing pieces, and how do you do that there, and so that's one way that a lot of that stuff gets written, and I don't believe that anybody can know every part of OpenStack, and so
Right.
that's part of the doc scaling question and issue. And I mean, I think there's also a really interesting philosophical debate, even amongst ourselves, on do you make docs super easy to walk up and contribute to, or do you actually have a you must be this high to write OpenStack docs, because if you don't have this knowledge base, you're not going to give us great contributions anyway. So, you know, and it's so ironic because I wrote an entire book about enabling community documentation techniques, right? So, like, I don't even have it figured out, but it's totally fascinating to me.
Well, I think it could be said that we don't exactly make it easy for for newbies to come in and work on you know, what ostensibly could be low-hanging fruit on the documentation tree. You know, not only do we obviously make a new contributor go through quite a bit of sort of, you know, barriers to entry as far as the CLA and the Garrett system and learning all the tooling around things, but also we gate for all of the integrated release projects, of which there are like 4. You know,
So you have this math problem, right?
Right. Always have. So we have a policy where even if it's just a typo being fixed in documentation or a doc string being added here and there, it runs a whole set of functional integration tests against that patch. You know, that's one thing, and I know we have, I think, a slide on this particular issue, or maybe a question on the Etherpad, but you know, that's one thing that we definitely don't make it easy for documentation contributors. So I personally would like to see that solved. But
Yeah.
I don't know. We're having a meta conversation about that on the mailing list right now.
Yeah. But you know, I do, like, today I do think we should focus, like, and make sure we, like, for an hour we're going to just talk about developer docs, and that's contributor developer and app developer, and these, they're separate, you know. So yeah, and talk about, you know, how do we do information architecture that helps each of them find what they need and doesn't confuse one. You could go like 5 links deep before you realize you're at the wrong place, you know. So
Right.
I'm totally interested in that. I'm very, very much wanting to get developer.openstack.org to serve app developers. So yeah,
So where would the developer reference go? That's what?
The app developer reference?
No, the contributor developer reference.
Well, and that's the thing. Right now, it's distributed across all these.
It's all over the place.
Right, it's across all the projects.
Right.
Yeah, and so any given project might have high quality, low quality, broken windows, not broken, you know. So
yeah, something on rtfm.org, something on GitHub, something on OpenStack.org, and the devref stuff. I mean, it's kind of all over the place, depending on whether it's a library or a server project. You know.
And I mean, you know, everything is definitely, if it is part of a build, it is on docs.openstack.org/developer for all of the projects. I'm pretty sure that's right. While you're going through integration, you are going to be on read the docs, not on an OpenStack.org
Right.
domain, just to be clear. Because, oh boy, that even confuses me. Wait, what state are you in, project name X?
So do you want to jump into the slides now at this point? It seems like we're starting to get into that conversation where we've got some structured content, and we'll
Sure.
try
We do have structured content.
Amazing. All right. I'm going to throw up that structured content, and I'm going to let Anne be our guide about where we're supposed to be in it.
Well, yes, Anne and I sort of threw these slides together over the last few days about some things that we'd like to talk about with regards to documentation. So I think we can all agree on this particular slide. Most developers traditionally suck at writing code comments.
And I have to interject one thing, Jay, because someone pointed out to me that as a writer, I have never had a developer tell me, no, your code sucks, I'm not going to help you with it. But developers are actually really good at saying, your code sucks, but I will help you with it. So what I would love to make sure people know is that the idea for the OpenStack Docs team is we're coaches, we're enablers, we're not going to tell you your stuff sucks.
Right, and I
Even
don't,
if it does, that's okay.
I think there is, before we go on to the, what are code comments and doc strings and what are some good examples and some bad examples, I think one of the reasons I put this in there is because I think developers have this, I don't know whether it's instinct or we're trained to think this way, but I think a lot of developers think their code isn't elegant enough unless it can be written without any code comments. and I mean, I've seen this. I've seen a lot of this where it's like, oh, the code should just document itself. And sure, code should be readable in in as much a fluid and elegant way as possible. But there are especially on like class doc strings and architectural and design things. Just looking at the code, I know Dan's probably sitting there shaking his head behind these slides, right? But I think there is a good place for, or I think there is a place for good doc strings and good code comments, especially around the why and the how of code, not the what is code doing, but why is it doing certain things, or or how a class is structured in relation to other classes. So I would personally love the OpenStack developers get out of the mindset that things don't need to be doc stringed or have extensive documentation or code comments in there, because it should just be obvious what's going on. I don't particularly subscribe to that. What do you think, Sean?
I don't think I'm in quite the same harsh position you are there.
Harsh?
We should definitely do more of that than we do, but I don't know. At the same time, the areas of the code that I most struggle with are the ones that don't have any comments and clearly are not obvious.
Well, yes, there are tons of places in OpenStack that we can point to, which is a good lead into the next slide.
Which slide are we on? We're on that slide. For people following along at home, we're on slide 3.
Slide 3. So, and I know that Dan is going to love the fact that his code comment is in the one that I pointed out here. So, build and run instance, right? It's like one of the most important methods in the compute manager. It handles a whole bunch of stuff, and it has zero documentation whatsoever on the parameters that are being passed, the return values, any side effects or exceptions that are raised from this particular method. There are a few comments, like, you can see Dan's little note to remove this in v4.0 of the RPC API, but other than that, there's virtually no comments whatsoever. This is the kind of thing that kind of drives me nuts, right? It's one of the most important pieces inside the compute manager, and yet we have virtually no information as readers of the code of what all these parameters are. Dan will know that up until very recently, when Dan put a patch in to fix this, but the requested networks parameter of this function was this giant JSON blobby dictionary of nested dictionaries and all sorts of nasty stuff until Dan made it into an object that could be, that had its own documentation and was easy to use. But there's really no way of telling that from looking at this code. Same with a lot of the things like filter properties and request spec. Completely undocumented. Nobody really knows.
Hang on, Jay. You're skipping over something.
Oh, sorry.
Aside from making me blush about requested networks, which you can't see, although you saw me shaking my head earlier, so I'm not really sure. But, nobody actually knows what's in request spec. So, I mean, like, even if we wanted to document it, I mean, there's not a human on the planet that actually knows what's in that thing. It's this big.
But there would be if documentation and doc strings
No, I think it's an unknowable thing. No.
I think we're deep into the paleoarchaeology of OpenStack.
Sure. Okay.
All right. So moving on from the current J rant.
All right. Fine.
But yeah, I mean,
Sean, go ahead and take it.
Right? Like we have this pile of old culture, legacy culture that came, so all you can do is dig out from under it using your archaeological tools, right?
Right. This is like a vestigial tale. I mean,
a warning tale to the future civilization.
All right.
Also, is this also part of scaling? Like once when you had 10 people, they were sitting around a table, they could holler at each other. That's not the case anymore.
Absolutely, and the importance of decent documentation inside the code goes up substantially when it gets more complicated and more people work on it. So.
Mm-hmm. And just bigger, right? I mean, being north of 1 million lines of code means that there's no one can have the whole model in their head, and having to put the whole model in your head to make any forward progress is not good.
Right. So, Mr. Smith, next slide, please. So, I threw this in there because it's okay. I don't want to seem like really ranty, but I guess I'm coming off really ranty. We should get Matthew Booth on because he can be rantier than me.
I really thought we were going to hear Ann talk.
Well, Ann's come up in like 3 or 4 more slides.
Sean, can you mute Joanne?
All right, let's keep moving. We'll keep
I'm his balance to the rant. So.
Okay.
Right. Anyway, so this is just about test methods. Don't put doc strings in test methods because it screws up the formatting of a lot of things, and make sure that doc strings and code comments.
That's mostly just a nose artifact that we don't use anymore, right? We pulled it all when we were using nose, but I don't think it causes an issue with tester.
Yeah. Well, this is also just sort of pointing out that the doc string is kind of pointless. Mm-hmm. Contrive test to ensure finish resize doesn't raise anything. Okay. We kind of went over this last session, but it's not a unit test in any way, shape, or form.
Sure.
But yeah, and then the code comments, create instance, and then the next line is create fake instance. So I don't know. I'm not saying be extremely verbose in your comments, but be useful in the comments. But anyway, okay, we can go on. So to balance my ranting and raving about something, I put in what would I consider to be a pretty good example of a doc string, right? For a fairly simple method, this is in the policy.py file in Nova, but it's clear what each of the parameters are and what they do, and it's clear the side effects of the function and the return values, and what. Although the interface isn't exactly what I would call completely elegant, it's clear from the doc string exactly what the function is going to do and is expected to do, and what the parameters actually mean. So.
And just for some clarification, like what's the sort of spec or language of the internals of this comment block?
You mean the quote or whatever it is, colon param?
Yeah. What's the grammar of this, or where do you reference what you've got available to you?
I honestly can't remember the PEP that it is. I want to say PEP 257, but I don't think it is.
Okay.
Maybe someone on the Etherpad or that's listening can write that down.
But it's Python PEP that basically defines this.
Right. It would be great if we were consistently using something like this inside of.
257.
Is it 257?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I couldn't remember the exact number, but it would be great if we were being consistent. Some people use like the @ sign and then param, which is more like Doxygen. But it would be great if we could be consistent. I would be just thrilled if we could just be consistent about having this information in important functions is certainly the top-level API functions, top-level interfaces, functions that are used often that aren't private type functions or helper functions. It would be great if we could have this kind of docstring for those things.
Yep.
All right, moving on. Yeah, docstring in library code, super important. Great example is Oslo config. Regardless of what you think about the design of Oslo config and the architecture of it and having a global conf variable and all that, I don't think anyone could say that the doc strings and documentation in Oslo config is not amazing. It's awesome in that it clearly explains what each of the classes are, clearly explains examples on how to use it, and lots of meaty examples that are realistic and useful.
So just a question on the examples thing, because I've actually run into this. I don't think it was Oslo config. It might have been one of the Keystone libraries, where like there were examples. Those examples reference classes that don't exist anymore. So like the problem with putting like code examples in docs is like they can very easily not like work anymore. Is there?
Sure, but I think that's a general problem of.
Sure, I'm just kind of curious.
Like,
is there actually a way to execute those examples from the docs as part of the normal process, so that you would know that like, oh, I wrote code examples and like they totally are not even classes that exist anymore.
Right. So I mean, doc test would be sort of the canonical example of how to do that. We don't use doc test, so which is the style of documentation that you'll see that uses. It looks like the Python command line or interactive interface.
Yep.
But we have not made use of that in any of the OpenStack libraries, as far as I can tell. That is one way of ensuring that things work as they're documented, but we don't use that.
Okay, but it's something we could look into. Cool.
Yeah, there's also libraries out there. So Josh Harlow, I don't know if he's listening or around, but he has a library called Doc8, which is kind of like a documentation PEP8 library. That might be something that we could look into. So.
Cool.
But yeah, I think mostly it's just about vigilance, right? Knowing that when you change this code or that code, that you should change the documentation along with it, because it's a big problem. It goes out of date.
And reviewers who value that as well, that point it out as you review code. Yeah. And I'm looking at PEP 257, and it doesn't tell you what to do with parameters. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a comment in Etherpad. It's Sphinx, and there's some documentation about reference points.
Got it. That's
captured in the Etherpad. It's awesome.
Thanks, Matt.
Okay, thanks.
All right, moving on.
All right, so let's see, what's the next one? I think the next one's about some class docstrings. What I was trying to get across here is that class docstrings should really describe the why and the how, which is the architectural and design decisions that were made by designing the class, and its relationships to other classes. If you want great examples of class docstrings done right and what they should describe, go look at TaskFlow. Pretty much all of the main, well, not pretty much, all of the main classes that are used are very well documented as far as how they interact with other classes and what the architectural purpose of the class is. So I have an example of that on the next page. They don't have to be super long, but the docstrings of important classes should describe what that class's relationship is with other things that are in the library. So I would much rather see that than the next page or the next slide, which is the host state class docstring from the scheduler, which really doesn't give me a whole lot of information whatsoever. For those of you who probably can't read the slide here, it just says mutable and immutable information tracked for a host. This is an attempt to remove the ad hoc data structures previously used and lock down access. Okay. So, right, I mean, it kind of assumes that the reader already knows about the ad hoc structures that were previously used and knows about the fact that access to it was not locked down. But it doesn't describe the relationship between host state and, say, host state manager, where it would be useful to know that there is a collection of host state objects for each compute node in the system, and that's managed by the host state manager. So, just an example of what I thought was important about docstrings and class docstrings. But now we can get on to REST API documentation.
Oh, and one other thing I wanted to bring up here, because when Jay and I were working on this, one of the things I asked him, like, Jay, it's so hard to get docstring changes through. What can we do about it?
Well, one of the sort of meta conversations that's going on right now on the mailing list is about the whole big tent thing, and one of the tangents or side conversations that's going on is how do we structure a machine-readable way of describing dependencies between projects and even within projects, modules and components, drivers. And I think one of the outputs of that is going to be a gate testing or changes to the gate platform that will allow things like don't run a whole bunch of tests when it's just docstring changes. One of the reasons that we do is partly because of the gate policies right now.
Well, no. It has to do. It's actually very unrelated to that.
Oh, then please enlighten me.
Yeah. So I mean, just the fact of the matter is, like, living in a Python world where everything can actually have significance, even stuff that's inside a docstring, which could be extracted by code, which could be often, we're in a fully dynamic world, right? So there is an exercise someone could do about Zool today has the idea that there's a base set of tests plus an additional set of things that you could do if some condition was met within the source tree. It actually doesn't have the inverse relationship, it can't not do a thing.
Okay.
So there is first a missing feature to just the way our test infrastructure works, and then there would have to be what do we consider safe to do less on? It would be really easy to be the doc subtree, which is all RST files, because we know that can't have an impact. It is actually a much harder thing to say, don't make that. We think this is a comment, so don't do a thing, because code can go and reach inside comments and use the structure of things inside comments to change behavior.
Really?
Because it's Python, and you can do anything.
Comments or docstrings? Docstrings I can see.
Yeah.
Comments.
No, so comments, so fair. But regardless, you actually have to build a state machine which says, I verify that there's no way that this can change behavior.
Sure.
And then don't do this thing. And today we've just said, well, we'll just run some things.
What about having a big red button?
Well, so I don't think we're going to re-architect the gate here in this. I think we should continue on with the docs conversation. Okay. But realize that it's not. I know it's been conflated with some other things. This is actually its own separate independent problem, which we should address, but it's actually not linked to the other things.
Okay.
All right, Anne.
So, and can I do one more about contributor developer docs?
Absolutely.
So one of the things I keep wondering is how useful is docstring automation to produce developer docs? I know it's required, but then when do you absolutely utterly have to write a nice onboarding developer doc? And do you write one for each project, or do you write one for OpenStack and say, really, if you know these things, you'll be fine?
So are you referring to the Sphinx AutoDoc and auto module stuff? Or
yeah, because over the years we've sort of, I think, evolved our thinking that you absolutely have to have AutoDoc. But then the maintenance on the handwritten stuff was so bad that it was worse. It was better to publish nothing than to publish anything that couldn't be maintained. So like, where do you? Anyway, I wanted to talk through that a little bit. Like, where should we live now? You know what I mean?
No, it's a good question.
Yeah. So the question is whether or not
I'm asking two, probably. Sorry, yeah. Like, one is, when do you just have to write stuff down and can't rely on automation? But the other is,
does it live at a project level or a global level?
live at a project level or globally, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a good point. I mean, it's part of some of the conversations now. Like, what up levels to global? I don't know. I got an answer. I think it's a good discussion question, though. Get it on the list.
Okay, yeah. And it ties into the onboarding interns and onboarding complete newcomers that Stefano's working on, So we can have that discussion elsewhere, but it's just something that I want people to know we're thinking about, of course.
Yep.
It's all tied together, right? I mean, contributor to developer docs, if that's your starting point with OpenStack, boy, oh, howdy, you're going to be in for it, right?
Yes.
Right, and it's similar to the cleanup that Stefano has been doing on the wiki as well, right? Which also has a tendency to get out of date quite quickly, I think that a similar solution to how do we prevent things from getting completely out of date and people relying on that information as good. It's on the wiki side as well.
Yep. All right. So on REST. RESTful. So Jay, you go ahead and talk about API discoverability.
Yeah. So this is something I put in there about, I guess, the direction that I think the community is moving towards, which would be having APIs that are fully discoverable, meaning you can hit an endpoint and follow links and schema documents that endpoint publishes to figure out what parameters, what paths are available in the API, what parameters each of those paths take, what, for instance, HTTP methods are supported for those paths, what the request and response bodies have in them. And I personally would love to see us once we completely get rid of XML, get to a stage where we're using these kinds of tools, JSON Home, JSON Schema, and JSON HAL, so a link format, for doing full API discoverability, meaning the entire API and everything in it is fully discoverable from a client perspective, and also from a documentation build tool perspective. I know that, Anne, you had pointed me to Swagger the other day, which I thank you so much. I spent like 3 hours reading through the Swagger documents on Tuesday, and they are awesome.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Swagger 2.0, at least, which is the one that I was reading, they make heavy use of JSON schema for everything. In fact, Swagger 2.0 is pretty much a superset of JSON schema and a few additions to that. And
so
go ahead.
So do you want to jump to like slide 14 and talk about the whole like describing APIs thing, because I think there's a lot of like terminology getting thrown out here, and we better to sort of bootstrap up from kind of like what do we have today?
That's probably. I'm gonna rearrange. Can I rearrange these on the fly? I don't even know.
You can go anywhere you want to go. What slide do you want to be on?
Go to 14. Well, yeah, I'll just move.
Okay, we're on 14 now. Dan's got us on 14.
No, I actually moved it. Yes.
Oh.
That is too awesome.
Dan, I guess you moved with it. Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, as we know, starting in 2010, WADL had just come out in 2009. It was the only game in town. I mean, let's be honest. I think I went to OSCON in 2011 when they announced something that was the equivalent of Swagger 1.0. So for its day, it was the right thing to do.
Well, can you describe, like, for the layperson, what WADL is?
And I love that I get to say waddle to Swagger.
Waddle is the spawn of the devil.
It's web application description language, which is, better than, say, SOAP, right? And so
Well, that's a very low bar to
low bar to hop on over, right? But the idea was that we should be able to, have and maintain these files. And again, we only had one WADL file in the beginning that described only the compute 1.0 API, I want to say, lovingly handcrafted by a PhD in computer science, right? Naturally, of course. So we then had to figure out a way, and this was back in the day when we were trying to figure out, well, how the heck do we document extensions for users? Extensions, the idea was, okay, we're always going to have a core API, and then vendors can put these extra things that may only work on their cloud. That'd be okay, or that would be eventually a candidate for going into the core API with things that we believe every compute API should be able to do. So, and I don't know if you guys know the numbers, but I think there's about 30-some calls in the compute API that's all documented with one WADL. Well, there's 90+ calls and extensions documented with, maybe another 40, 30 WADL files. So the idea is, we should be able to have these descriptive documents. And
where are those WADL files kept?
Oh, okay. So those are kept in the OpenStack/API-site repository. And what was even worse is back in the day, we had a WADL file that was built into this booklet format and a WADL file that was built into this API reference listing. So what I've done in the last release is I've gotten rid of any WADLs outside of this API-site repo. So we now have at least one place for truth. But the thing that keeps coming up to me over and over is in 3 years' time we haven't seen maintenance on these. I couldn't tell you though if it's all because it's WADL or if API docs are really hard to maintain because they're so detail oriented, right?
So,
but let's play an experiment. Let's switch it out of WADL and find out, right?
And so you've talked about Swagger a little bit. What you want to give a background on what that is, what the advantages are over this, why you think that's a good transition system?
So what we're doing now at Rackspace, we have a guy on the developer experience team whose sole job is testing SDKs. And SDKs that work against, Rackspace Cloud or OpenStack, either or. So any OpenStack Cloud also. And he has actually worked on a conversion tool that could take WADL to Swagger. So Swagger is a spec for describing REST APIs written in a community fashion, and it has about 2 years on any of the other possibilities. Another possibility is called RAML. RAML. I got to look up what that stands for. RESTful API Modeling Language. And so that one is another YAML-based, language. It has pretty nice kind of inclusion mechanisms. So what we're doing at Rackspace is investigating both because, API reference listings are pretty important, and as we keep adding APIs, where I think at Rackspace we probably run 7 or 8 APIs that are in common with OpenStack, but I want to say we have 14 APIs that are not in common with OpenStack, and that's internal and external APIs, right? Because we have to have admins running commands too. So we're looking into this from the standpoint of what can we promise a customer that it will work and not break? What can we document and have our quality engineering team trust as truth? Or even, one of the things we do now with WADL files at Rackspace is they're the configuration for repos, so that if your request doesn't even meet the standards set in the WADL, it'll be returned to the user with error messages. So, that with that kind of use case, of course you want to try to reuse it for your documentation, but my investigation is showing it's really hard to maintain. They're not truly being cross-shared. It's just we really need another solution. And I'm a pretty firm believer, as I learn more and more about this, that you really need some kind of human looking at these. You can't just auto-generate WADL. You can't just auto-generate Swagger from living existing APIs. Now, if you're just going to write an API from scratch, you'd probably start with Swagger, and that would help you draw out all of your design flaws, right? But we're looking at this from the other end, which is, oh my God, we have to help users understand our APIs. So
are you familiar, Anne, with in Nova the JSON schema? I guess, what do we call them? API samples templates? Is that what they're called? I think that's what they're called.
Yeah, but they're not actually JSON schema at this point.
No, they never were.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry.
The JSON schema was used on the validation stuff. But yes, we have our API samples.
Yeah. And those are awesome. We brought them all into the documentation. We looked for an automated way to do that, but really we just ended up kind of having an intern take care of it, kind of thing.
Fix it with an intern.
Like, do you code it or do you? Yeah. So, but that was great. And here's the thing about like a conversation like this is there are teams doing it really well. How can we get that to be across all of the projects? And honestly, what WADL did, as soon as we had a beautiful output, then people were like, oh, I better go write a WADL. Okay. It'll look pretty in the end. And so, you know what I mean? Like, that was what was so amazing is as long as we had something beautiful that was useful, people did bring the source, even if it was a pain in the neck, Mm-hmm. And so what I just want to do is make the source not such a pain in the neck and make the maintenance better so that it's not so hard to know the truth.
Right.
Yeah. And honestly, right now, I think we've been doing at Rackspace, we've been looking into RAML versus Swagger 2.0, and it's kind of like you can see why each is going to do really well. It's just that Swagger seems to have the further community run, and RAML has an editor that's proprietary. So for my analysis, we got to have open source all the way down, and
right.
For now, Swagger's the lead.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed with it when I looked at it. When I put together that proposed vNext OS Compute API thing, I used something called API Blueprint, which was okay to deal with, but I actually think that Swagger 2.0 would have been a better.
But Swagger 2.0 was just released like.
Yeah, it's very recent, but it has a lot fixes for a lot of the issues that I had with API Blueprint. Even though I liked API Blueprint more than, say, WADL or really anything with an X in it or W.
Anyway, anything with tags. Yeah, and I mean the only thing that I sort of did an analysis on the Blueprint idea as well. Here's where I'll rant. A comment per call will never work for us.
Right.
That's what frightened me to death about their output.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you explain, like, maybe I don't know all the context on that. So can you explain a little bit more, like, what it was that they were doing that like,
so I think Anne is more referring to the apiary.io sandbox than
right, yeah.
the format. But so apiary.io is the place where you can upload your API Blueprint document, and it will create a API front end that you can then hit with testing tools. Okay. And you can comment on each and every call made to that endpoint. And the discussion arena quickly becomes unruly by that attribute of the sandbox. Is that?
So this is one of those issues where it's like 1,000 paper cuts problem, where like it drives the conversation down to the narrow versus like thinking of the broad.
Right. It's kind of like having an IRC conversation simultaneously with 100 people. It just it breaks down very quickly.
Sure.
Jay, what was your sense of whether they were trying to be a proprietary startup?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of startups in the API documentation space right now, which is exciting, but for us, we're going to have to be cautious about what we.
Right. No, I have no idea about that. Their user interface for constructing and validating the API blueprint was awkward for large API blueprints. It works very well for anything less than, say, 1,000 lines or so. But when you have multiple, for instance, if you have multiple failures and errors in your API blueprint, it it won't give you the line number if it's past 1,000. So it's like,
we saw that too.
Yeah, it was really annoying. But that's that's neither here nor there.
So I'm going to give us a time check because we're at like 1:45.
Yeah.
And I don't want us to run over too much. And if I look at this, so I kind of feel like we've actually covered like the conversation is sort of what the next 5 slides were.
Sure.
But on 17 where we start talking about doc impact stuff, I think that's like an interesting like bit all on its own that would be great to get Anne's perspective on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we covered everything. I mean, just to circle back on like discoverability, JSON home, JSON schema, another point I have to make is that what we've run into with some of the incubating teams is they can't really have an OpenStack domain until they're already OpenStack. So that has tripped us up for any kind of like, you can publish your schemas here and they'll be here forever and docs will maintain them forever kind of thing. So
right. Doc is not a dumping ground.
Yeah, nor are we we can't give away the brand name, like we kind of have to be protective, So it's a chicken and egg. I don't know how to solve that either, but that may be one of the limiters for discoverability of APIs. I don't know. That'd be sad if it was, because there's got to be a better solution, right? Yeah. But yeah, I'd love to get a sandbox. Jay, you remember when we, it was back in the day when we first released TriStack, and I think at that same design summit we released this API reference listing, which had never existed. And I had people coming up to me like, thank you, so we know we want to do this. We know it's necessary. And just want to find the best way to do it in the ecosystem we have. So, yeah, we can skip down to Doc Impact. So, Doc Impact even this week had a new change that I'm kind of excited about. Originally, developers could just add a flag, Doc Impact, in any patch to any code base that they thought would affect end-user docs, configuration docs, deployer docs. This is going to affect upgrades, all of the stuff that will affect your end users somehow. And it would automatically log a doc bug in the OpenStack-Manual's Launchpad project. And as we iterated on making it better, like originally it would just log a bug no matter what, and then if the patch never landed, we had like 50 doc bugs that, you know what I mean? Right? So, okay, we're not doing that anymore because that was bad. Yeah, but then we were able to triage from there because the docs team has another Launchpad project where we track API doc bugs. So now what we can do is more finely tune if your project has a doc bug, if your project has a doc impact patch, which Launchpad project or storyboard project do you want the doc bug to be logged in? And I think I still need to understand better exactly where the doc impact should be flagged for like configuration options.
So are you talking about the change that happened this week?
Yeah, that just happened this week where you can more finely point which.
And how does that work? Is it like doc impact and then parentheses or something? Or?
It's documented in that wiki page on there. So doc impact is just literally on the commit message on the line all by itself, doc impact. But then if you want to do better configuration to get your doc bugs that are automatically generated from that into the right project, you can update your projects.yaml, and there's this doc impact group. And so if you change that to the project where you'll be tracking your doc bugs. And because the thing, and this is another kind of integration incubation thing, the doc team can't take on, we don't want to inflate our doc bug numbers. We'll never know how far behind we are. We all know we're behind, but how far, So that's the idea behind being able to kind of more finely tune the pinpoint of where your doc impact is. So,
right.
And honestly, you know, OpenStack manuals used to be this only source for the deployer user docs, and now what we're doing, even over the last year, we took the operations guide into its own repo. The security guide is in its own repo with its own set of reviewers. We just moved the high availability guide into a new repo with its own set of reviewers, because each of these are very like specialized areas anyway. So the first one we split out was API docs. The next split was operations guide. You know what I mean? So it's almost like we're trying to get more more teams that are very focused on specific documentation and knowledge areas.
What are the things that OpenStack contributors can do to help out the doc team in this particular regard? Is it, I mean, is it just putting doc impact in the commit message? Is it making sure that the commit message itself contains a piece of information about why there is a doc impact tag in there? So one of the things that I brought up on reviews is if you put a doc impact tag, you should have somewhere described what the doc impact is.
Yeah.
Right? Don't just assume, okay, the doc team is just going to go in and review your entire patch and deduce what the doc impact is from it.
We do that. It's pretty awful. But yeah, and if reviewers can say, hey, there has to be more info, as soon as you put doc impact in your commit message, the rest of the commit message should be considered as if you're logging a triage doc bug for the doc group or for yourself to write them. Because
okay.
the other thing I don't want doc impact to become is like a throw over the wall, like there's a team ready to catch it. Oh,
right. That's what I've seen. A lot of people think, oh, I'll just put a doc impact tag in there and they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that developers know what useful information they can put in the commit message.
Ann, do you have like some examples of here's some really great ones that were super awesome and we really like that people did it this way, and like here's one that don't try to do it this way? I mean, like, I'm personally always an example-oriented person, so if someone's like, this is what I need, show me like two or three examples of something good.
I hate to pick on anybody.
Dan.
Picking on people is great. Like, I think that's fun.
I like to put doc impact on patches that have absolutely no doc impact at all. See how long.
Yeah, just to make people dive in, right? Right.
I mean, we don't need it now, but I'm just thinking about it. Like,
well, just putting a good example in the Etherpad, I think is fine.
Yeah, or as part of this wiki or whatever, right? It's like, you know, like let's learn by example.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw one in the Etherpad. Just, you know, this is a new doc bug with doc impact. And honestly, looking at it, I'm not even sure if I can tell you whether it's good or bad. But here's the thing about doc impact too. There's a configuration aspect where if you configure it this way, then the API behaves this way. So you actually have two docs you'd have to update, right? One is for the people who are administering their OpenStack cloud to make it behave a certain way for their users. But the other one was for the user itself. So, you know, some of these, you know, there's one code patch, but it might affect two docs. That can happen. I don't know if this one's a great example, but, and the other thing is that I want to make sure people know is we scrape for configuration options themselves. So definitely still put a, you know, doc impact in there, but I mean, our stuff is good enough now that it even says, here's the new here's the new configuration options. Here are ones that are deprecated with this release, and here are the new names of the options. And I can't remember, new, changed. Yeah, new and changed. So if we've got a rename, it's now described differently. Or if the default changed, we capture that. So that's, you know, that's how we can keep up with code that releases every 6 months and has. Are we up to 2,000 configuration options now? Like
across all of OpenStack, or just in Nova?
I'm sure. Yeah, Nova's north of 600. So.
Yeah, Nova's always been insanely high. So
I just had a 10 this morning, so.
You just,
awesome.
Thanks for that.
Hey, do you happen to know, just because like as a question came up in Atlanta, like we used to not be able to put structured text inside the config options. They'd all get stripped out.
Restructured text
or anything. It all just gets flattened and wrapped by the config generators. Like just when we talk about, like we showed some structured like comments before that had like, here's all these things with structured text and it actually readable that way. But as far as I know, the last time I looked, like documenting config options, the description tag didn't support that mechanism. Which, when you're doing complicated things where it's like this config option exists for a following very specific scenario, you want to actually give not just have it be one run-on sentence.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're at 5 of, so I think we should probably drop the slides, get Dan's face back on here. We've got at least one question from Everett, and we'll kind of go to wrap up the discussion.
I can answer that. I mean.
Well, there's a question from Everett before that one.
Where are the JSON schemas for the APIs? So yeah, there's that, and then Anne had one below. So I'll just copy it.
Oh, and yeah, the only other JSON schema I know of is the image schemas.
Okay.
Anybody else know of any others?
Wait, hold on. Ah.
Oh, I won't click in there.
You're clicking all the clickies.
Damn! All right, now I just screwed everything up.
Whatever. It'll be fine. You can fix it afterwards.
Yeah, whenever I paste in an Etherpad, it goes crazy for me. I should log that anyway.
Yeah, good luck getting these.
There. Okay.
There we go.
Whew.
Okay. And the other question, I'm definitely interested in being part of the API standards working group and pushing that forward. Whether leading it or whatever, I don't care. I just want to be in the conversation.
Cool.
As I think many people are, or as I think many people do.
So do we have other questions from the field? We've got a few viewers still on. Anything else someone wants to throw in the Etherpad for questions? Or any other questions from Dan? You have anything you want to throw at Dan?
I think mine were covered.
I'm just going to leave that up.
No, and it's really hard for people to know, what's good documentation or what's enough info in doc impact. And so, I suppose we really do just have to, that's where the coaching comes in, right? Where I'm going to ask you questions until I get a suitable answer. And yeah.
Well, yeah, so I guess on that, that's always a question I've got where someone will be like, oh, we need documentation for this. And to me that feels like only it's not enough of a conversation, right? What was the question the question that you might have may not be obvious to me. So Anne, do you have a standard pattern for helping kind of help people figure out what it is that is appropriate?
Yeah, it always starts with audience analysis, because I'm just so crazy about segmenting. I will not write to those people.
Mm-hmm.
And some things need to be learned in other ways.
So what do you mean by audience analysis? Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So basically, because OpenStack has all these different personas, let's call them. There's Anna the admin, there's, Mike the app dev. And so what you have to say first is, well, who am I writing for? And that is almost always going to sort out a lot of stuff for you. And so, part of my belief is, developers should write for developers, operators should write for operators. I think those are the best matchups for open source documentation.
Mm-hmm.
So always start with, well, who needs to know? Then look for where does that typically get surfaced. Maybe you write a blog post because it doesn't belong in the official docs. Maybe it's and God, I can't believe I suggest that, but I have to, because the scope of OpenStack docs just expands and expands,
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing is really a task analysis. Well, okay, so we know we're going to write to the day-to-day administrator of an OpenStack cloud, so get to know what's her day like, what is their concerns, how much do they already know, what can you assume they know, that kind of thing. And then what are they actually trying to do? And so I'll even suggest, when you're working on something that requires something for admins, what is the actual task? Are they doing this every 7 days? Are they doing this every day? And then try to figure out from there what you would write down each time. Yeah.
And so what about when you...
Audience analysis followed by task analysis, and always somewhere have reference info.
So what about when you... So that's... You talked about developers writing for developers or ops writing for ops. What about when you're trying to sort of jump some information across those domains? Like, how do you approach that constructively?
That is really tough with our current information architecture. And especially like notifications on a compute state, a compute VM state. Like, of course, the developer needs to know, so it should be in the developer docs. Would you write it differently for an operator who needs to then turn around and help their user with the state that their VM suddenly got into? Like, yeah, it crosses all of them, right? But I might actually say that's where it gets tough. You're gonna have to write for everybody, even if it's 3 deliverables.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good answer.
Write
It is a good
docs. Yeah.
Anyone else got questions for Anne as we round out?
I don't see anything on the Etherpad.
Cool. Well, so I want to, Anne, thank you for coming and joining us today. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
This will be archived shortly and up for anyone to watch after the fact. In the wiki page, we've got a bunch of talks coming up. You can see what's listed there. I think we've decided our cadence is every other week, although we're going to be fudging around Summit because there's, you know, travel, and then there's everyone is apparently traveling through France afterwards. So we'll see exactly when we hit the roll. But there'll be another one in 2 weeks. Dan and Russ will be talking about the RPC layer in Nova, which should be pretty cool.
So we'll actually hear Dan talk.
Absolutely.
Was I notified about this?
Yes, you even agreed to it.
I'm not sure I agreed to any timing. I said hand wavy at some point.
Well, it's got a date. You can go fight with Russell if you don't like it. All right. Thank you all for joining. We're going to cut the live stream. Hosts, you can stay on, or everyone here can stay on. We'll chat a little bit afterwards. Thank you, guys. We'll see you in another couple weeks. Bye.